prescribing policy, or saying that I think we should pass cap-and-trade legislation, or I think we should pass a carbon tax. And I have colleagues who are willing, to take a position in the policy debate on those issues. My point is simply that I wish that's the debate we were having. That's the debate we ought to be having. Should we have a carbon tax? Should we have cap-and-trade? If we have a carbon tax, what's the right level of what should the tax be? What should the incentives for renewable energy be? What is the economic and the political considerations? There's a good faith debate to be had there, but there is no good faith debate to be had over the reality and threat of the problem. And so I see my role as a scientist in making sure that we have the good faith debate over policy and economics, and that's not, and I don't, that's not my area of expertise, and I don't pretend to to have I leave that to the policy and economics experts to work out, as long as they're willing to act on a foundation of accurate science. And so I guess that's that's sort of where I stand. And I will be called an I am called an advocate. I'm by some I'm dismissed because I am playing a role in the public discourse on this issue. And increasingly, just saying that climate change is a problem is a political statement because of where we've arrived in our politics. And as I said earlier, it wasn't that long ago when that wasn't the case, when the denial of climate change was not a litmus test for one of the two major parties in American politics. And one of the greatest heroes in my story was Sherwood Bullard, a Republican. So it wasn't that long ago that we weren't bogged down in this partisan divide over even whether the problem exists. Yeah.
So sorry to get here late, and so I presume, first of all, thank you for persevering, not being beaten down or driven off, the platform that you have.
Yes.
And I also think, just responding a little bit to what you just said, I think it's fine, to say, look, these are the facts as best we understand them. Now, that means we better do something about it because of this body of facts and validated information. What we, in the way you said it, so it's okay to be an advocate, and so I wouldn't walk away from advocacy, and I don't think that means that you're not doing good science. There's a I thought it was put very well.
I agree with you completely.
Yeah, it was put very well in it. There was a movie by Fritz Lang, who some people probably know. He was a German exile who made amazing movies in the 30s, 40s, 50s in the United States. And in one movie, there's a line where somebody says, "A free science in the service of humanity." And it's a paradox. If it's free, how can it be serving? It's not free if it's serving. Well, so it's dialectical or something like that.
Right.
Now, I'm going to presume that you already really explained what the hockey stick controversy was about.
Yes, that was more or less what I talked about.
And I'll move on to a more sort of detailed question. People like Harry Emanuel, who you probably know,
He's a good friend of mine. Yeah.
He's a very good scientist, rather conservative. Actually, he's a member. He's a Republican Party. He's in the Republican Party. He told me. Carrie, who teaches at MIT, studies tropical cyclones, otherwise known as hurricanes.
Ming was a student with, or a
yeah,
postdoc with Carrie.
Yeah, so he's great. He's a great guy, I think. And he said, as a careful scientist would, about the movie Inconvenient Truth, that yes, there were some inaccuracies there. And I'm going to also assume that you may have touched on some of that, and the nuance there that does not discredit the underlying facts. But what I'm curious about is there's this other guy at MIT. Is it Linzen?
Dick Linzen.
And he's an interesting guy because I think he's respected to a degree for some of his science, and yet, according to Ross Gelbspan, who wrote for the Globe and then wrote an early book about the politics of this.
Ross is a good friend too. He lives over in Brookline.
Yeah,
Brookline.
yeah. Well, Ross has said that he was taking, he was recipient of funding, some financing from, I don't know, the coal industry or something. And he also smokes, which some people think were discredits. I mean, that's...
Much more than that. He's actually been asked by a journalist whether or not he believes that there's a linkage between tobacco and lung cancer, and he said no, he doesn't believe there's a linkage.
Okay, so I'm interested in, if you have anything further, not just to tee off on somebody personally, but if you have more to say about his particular interesting place in all of this.
Yeah, there are mavericks in science, and there's a role for mavericks in science. There's nothing wrong with being skeptical. In fact, and I talk about this at great length in the book, skepticism is actually an essential thing in science. It's the self-correct, as Carl Sagan very eloquently put it, it's the self-correcting machinery that keeps science moving forward towards a better understanding of the world, the natural world. But when skepticism becomes one-sided, then it's no longer skepticism at all.
Right.
It becomes contrarianism, or in its most severe form, denial, denial of science, and that there are some who will happily put forward arguments for why they don't accept the consensus behind human-caused climate change, that don't stand up to even the slightest bit of scientific scrutiny. And so how can we call that skepticism? Unfortunately, Dick Lindzen, who is a respected scientist, a member of the National Academy, made fundamental contributions to our understanding of stratospheric atmospheric dynamics. He did some really important work in atmospheric dynamics. He was never actually, he wasn't recognized by the National Academy for his work on climate change. Just like, Linus Pauling didn't receive the Nobel Prize for his theories on orange juice and vitamin C and colds. So, just because you're recognized for a significant contribution in one area of science doesn't necessarily make you an expert in some other area of the science. And when it comes to the issue of climate change, Lindzen has put forward a number of hypotheses challenging the mainstream sort of scientific understanding of climate change. And I detail these actually in the book. I talk quite a bit about this. In fact, I say that, so there's this issue of feedbacks, right? If the only issue were the CO2 itself, then the warming of the planet would be relatively moderate, probably only about a degree Celsius for a doubling of CO2 concentrations. Climate change wouldn't be a big problem. It's only because of what we call feedbacks, amplifying factors within the climate system. If you increase CO2, you put some warming into the system, that actually creates other changes that amplify the warming further. And so, so there are negative